from the core of my heart. I get absolutely sentimental when I come here to the Darbar Hall because I feel this is the heart of our festival. This Darbar Hall is an ancient building. Some of the new ones look about the same, but this is part of the Diggi family's heritage property, and it served many purposes. It was, as it suggests, a Darbar Hall. And 10 years ago, our audiences for the entire festival were about as many as all of you in the room here today. So I remember those days, and it's never for me the size of an audience that matters, but the quality of the audience. And the quality of our audiences in the Jaipur festival is so extraordinary. They are so engaged, they are so deep. So I just get into a little bit of a Jazbati emotional moment when I see the Shakti Peeth of our festival here. Then the other special privilege of introducing this session is because we've titled it At Home in the World. And the title is taken from Tagore's famous book and Ray's subsequent film, Ghare Baire, or Home and in the World. But in Nimrana in 2002, we organized the first ever International Festival of Indian Literature, which was a seminal turning point in the interaction between Indian languages with each other and the rest of the world. That festival was titled At Home in the World. And indeed, both the writers with me today, both of whom I am fortunate to count as my friends, are equally at home in their worlds and in the world at large. So I'm going to briefly introduce both of them to you, and then they will one by one read from their works and explain them in context. Ladies first, so we'll begin with Anita Agnihotri, who is the author of 40 books of poetry, short stories, children's literature, novels, and essays. She writes in Bangla, but she's been translated extensively into English and also into German and Swedish. She didn't particularly want me to mention it, but she's a bureaucrat. And I think that why I'm mentioning it is I think it has to do with the depth of her engagement with many of the aspects of privilege, so underprivilege, marginalization in India, which more privileged, more elitist writers don't sometimes get to see. Her encounters, her various encounters with the heart of India have made her more sensitive, more emotionally vulnerable to the poverty, injustice, and human suffering around us in every corner in this country. Her reactions carry the hopes and despair of a true writer, as well as sometimes the detached understanding of somebody who also has to take a professional view of these things. To quote from her interview in The Hindu, she says, "I have always had these conflicts where I wonder which side I am on, the administrators or the other side. I often try and see how the displaced see the state." And this is a very important part of her work. "Being an administrator is my job, and I'm committed to it, and try to deliver with efficiency and competence. But I look forward to a time when I'm not working and can spend my time writing and traveling through villages and meeting people." And I'd urge you to buy one of her books and read these very, very taut and very moving stories. So over to Anita Agnihotri, and I look forward to hearing her read and to talk about her work and take all of us into her world. Thank you, Anita. But let me give you a hint about Vivek Shanbagh, so that you are not completely then unprepared for what comes next. Vivek Shanbagh writes in Kannada and in English, and he is a creative polymath who's equally at home with poetry, fiction, and drama. He's published 5 short story collections, 3 novels, and 2 plays, and has edited 2 anthologies, one of which is in English. Many of his stories have been adapted to the stage, and one of them, Nirvana, has been made into a short film. Vivek founded and edited the pioneering Kannada literary journal Deshkal for 7 years. He's an engineer by training, and as for all engineers, process is a very important part of his creative journey. And, he is somebody who lives in this world, not only the striving for glory in the international world. And although his latest work has been very, very highly received in the so-called inverted commas Western world, with Granta saying, oh, wow, and all these things, but he is rooted, as indeed both of them are, in the sound and texture of their own language while remaining part of the international literary world. Sorry for going on and on. Over to you, Anita. And I'll come and give you a glare when it's time to give up. So till then, just go on. Don't time yourself.
Thank you, Namaskar. Thank you, Namita, for introducing us, me in particular, with such generosity. I write in Bangla, and I don't know if I can ask you, does anybody in the audience know or read Bengali? Okay. So I just thought I will generally tell you about my writing in the context of the Indian writing. It's a very interesting scenario now. People like Vivek and me who write in Indian languages. A lot is happening there. And since we do not have the older generation, who could have grasp over multiple languages. There would be people in the previous generation, 2, 3 Indian languages. You can't read us except in translation. And the way translations are available is very different from the way an original work in Indian English writing would be available. But that is not really very important. I remember yesterday I was at a different time in this hall, where I was introducing 2 very extraordinary writers. One is Dhrubajyoti Bora from Assam, and other is Marian Molteno. One of the young friends from the audience asked me, he used the word vernacular, to which I objected. He said, why do you write in this vernacular language when it is no more the language of India? So I told him that, listen, I can only write in the language which I know. I mean, I can't learn Mandarin and write a book in it. So that brings me to the essential question of, why we write. I was also interacting with a number of very important authors who have written maybe 1 or 2 books in English, and I was seeing that the way they write. In Kolkata, which is as my children often jokingly say, the city that has been bombed, looks like that. But it's a very interesting place to write. I started very early in my childhood. I was a child of 5 when I could say a few lines of poetry composed by myself. And my enthusiastic parents would take it down because I couldn't write. Once I started writing, I never looked back and never depended on them. But we were very lucky that in Bengali that time, Satyajit Roy, who is otherwise known as a very eminent film personality, film director, but he was also a writer for children and used to edit this magazine, Shandesh. So he gave me a kind of an open avenue. Whatever I could write between the age of, let us say, 11 when I became a subscriber officially, to the age of 18, whatever I wrote, he published. In fact, even letters to editor would be published by him. So that was a great pampering a child received, and in fact, why I slightly hesitate being introduced as a civil servant is, I was a writer, though not a very well-known writer, but a writer of poetry and prose even before I got into civil service. So I just made a career choice, and I again say this because I'm a very poor speaker. I can't speak well. My option was, after I did my economics in Kolkata, to become a lecturer in economics, which was a frightening prospect because I saw one of my senior professors who was speaking in the class, and one page of his note papers flew away in the fan air and he stopped there, because without that page he couldn't continue to speak. So I knew that if I am lecturer, some such catastrophe is bound to happen. So I ran away. I literally ran away, left Calcutta, went to the National Academy of Administration and joined the IAS. Now in civil service, the advantage is, I don't know how Vivek would like it, all the audience are captive. Even if you don't like what I'm saying, your colleagues and your junior colleagues cannot leave the room. That is not on. So I had to speak, but not with great proficiency. But here I feel scared because I have to speak about myself. I should not overstate. But I would tell you the conflicts and problems in the life of a writer like me, who writes in Bengali, but could actually never continue to stay in Bengal, which is the language milieu. In fact, there is a trade-off. I left Kolkata, but I got in exchange the entire country. I traveled extensively to Chotanagpur, where I worked, to Odisha, south and north, all over India, in fact, in particular Madhya Pradesh, villages of Maharashtra. And I would say that my travel and my interface with people got me very close to a reality about which I continue to write. Somehow I never felt a sense of affinity with the middle class and upper middle class of Calcutta. And even today I'm not a popular writer. But with time, I started with poetry, I went into short stories, then wrote novels, gradually got translated. I have a steady readership, and I am now taken, I can say after 35 years of writing, taken a bit seriously as a writer. But it is a difficult thing in the sense that, I would slightly contradict Namita, that when you go out and meet people, it is a problem in the system that immediately a barrier is raised between the people and us. So if you could really empathize and if you could really see the reality, then I would say a lot of fine writings would have actually come out of what the civil servants see in the field. Unfortunately, the stands which we have to take, the position we have to uphold, all this work as filters in our seeing. I have to some degree of success and with a lot of failure, I have tried to dissociate myself from the reality of my existence in the hierarchy, but it has not been easy. That is why I always feel that I am not a confident writer. I am a person who is caught in a conflict. In Bengal, it is called Tana Poden of my two existences. On top of it, I was away from my language milieu, so I had to keep up. I have sacrificed a lot of my other reading of Indian languages. I kept on reading Bengali, contemporary and classical Bengali. So all this, in the end, develops a kind of sense of fatigue in you. I look forward to a time when I am out of the job, sometime end of this year, go back to Calcutta, write, and of course travel all over India, which has been my what shall I say, passion for all my life. So I would like to tell you about the kind of things I write. I have written a large number of short stories, but a few of these, about 30 of them, have been translated into English by a very able translator called Arunav Sinha, who is one of our prolific translators of our time, and his grasp on both the languages is superb. There's one book called 17, which contains 17 short stories, was brought out by Zuban, my friend Urvashi Butalia. And this book got Crossword Award in 2012, which gave me some kind of a distinction of getting an award which is beyond Bengal, I would say. And Arunabhu has also translated a set of political stories, as they would call it. It's a book called Sabotage, which has been brought out by Social Science Press. In these stories, basically, I have tried to explore the India which often do not come up in the, let us say, the pages of the newspapers. We are in a large and a complex country with layers and layers of existence of people. There are communities, there are people whom we do not ever encounter. And I somehow feel that the strength that I have derived in my own everyday life is essentially from the beliefs and the strengths of the people with whom I interact. I've tried to write, as I said, it is not, what I write is not authentic documentation. Obviously, it's creative fiction, so it gets mixed with imagination. It can often be faulted as not being correct, let us say. But that has not been the objective. I have enjoyed writing the way I write. And as I told you, people in Bengali, they feel they get a taste of a different world when they read some of my writing. And in English also, I have got a few readers by now. I recently finished a novel which became one of the most challenging tasks in my own writing life. It is a book which has just come out in Bengali a few months back. It is called Mahanadi. This is a river. Mahanadi is one of the large rivers of India which has started in Chhattisgarh and has made the Bay of Bengal in near Paradip, Odisha. So I had been to this area of Mahanadi where the river has entered Odisha and come to the sea. It's the most fascinating large river, but what is most fascinating is the way it moves from, every river does, but you know, the way we look at Ganga. It is something very different because of its own association with maybe ancient cities which are still alive like Varanasi, it has Haridwar, then it has gone through important cities and towns. Mahanadi is not like that. It is a river which is different when it is in Chhattisgarh. How much time do I have? 5 minutes, okay. So I wrote about this river and mainly not so much about the river and its geography, but the people who come to settle on both sides of it. And we hope to see the book in English and Odia also in some time. And this became one of the most challenging tasks that I've ever achieved because every time I would feel that I would sink and may not be able to see the other side of the novel. But somehow I floated across. It took me 4 years to write it. It is not a very easy book to read even for Bengali readers, but I'm sure some people will read it. So what I will do, I'll read a bit in English from the book, which Arunabhu has translated for me, a part of it, and a little bit in Bengali, and I'll conclude with that. This is about the Mahanadi when it flows in Sonpur, a district of Odisha. Walking down the narrow lane to the ghat at Tetultala, Shubal discovers this extraordinary sight or achievement almost every day, this river. It is no lifeless geographical landmark. It's a beautiful, magical and distant woman from his own family. There is some old human habitation in this part of town. The lanes are dirty, uncared for. The stone layers have peeled off with mud and slime accumulating. The house that Subal lives in is an old small building, the bricks exposed. Subal and his family cannot afford a higher rent, and the landlord hasn't bothered with repairs. It's almost as though he wants the building to collapse on its tenants. As Subal stands at Tetutala Ghat in the morning, waiting for a long day of unemployment to be born, the blood in his veins begins to agitate in despair. He is not remotely adroit with words, nor does this stirring magic of poetry infect his thoughts. But still, Subal does write some verse these days alongside his prose. How beautiful the expanse of the river in the morning. Across the water, stretching to the horizon, the golden hue of the sandbank on the other side is visible. The clouds are reflected in the clear water. Near the bank, the water is dark green. Is it green or emerald, lightening gradually to the sky blue? Rocks rise out of the water, large or small, enormous at some places. Although not visible here, strong rock structures can be seen in the north, where the tail flows into the Mahanadi. Satta says the rocks on the river bed at Sambalpur are much narrower and steeper. Why? Is the current stronger here, tormenting the rock, cutting into it deeply? Water cutting into rock is an unusual image, a strange thing to happen. Water has force, rock does not. Rock is helpless. I can't resist reading from Bengali, so I'll read a little bit. One passage. Very short. I will just read one short passage about Mahanadi again, where it enters Odisha. You know, in 1956, the Hirakud Dam was created, submerging hundreds of villages. And it is about the day. uh, Okay, I'll just read the passage and conclude it. সন্ধ্যের মুখে পাখিরা যখন বাসায় ফিরে আসছে, তখন তো হীরাকুদে অগাধ জলের সাগর, নীল জল ঢেউয়ে মৃদু মৃদু দুলছে। জল ছাড়া হয়েছে সকালের পরই, নদীর জল স্লুইস গেট পথে এসে ভরে দিয়েছে দেশের সবচেয়ে বড় বাঁধের বুক। তখন পাখিরা দিশাহারা, তাদের চেনা গ্রাম, গাছগুলি সব গাছের তলায় আর্ত ডাক কান্নার মতো শোনাচ্ছে। তারা ডানা ঝটপটিয়ে খুঁজছে সেই ডালপালা, যেখানে তারা উড়ে এসে বসতো। বসার সব ঠাঁই তলিয়ে গেছে জলে, তাই পাখিগুলি জলের উপর গোল হয়ে ওড়ে আর ওড়ে। কে বলে দেবে কোন গাছে ছিল তাদের না ফোটা ডিম, তাদের না উঠতে শেখা ছানারা। থ্যাংক ইউ।
Very nice. Well, that was, I'm delighted to hand over the stage to Vivek Shanbagh, who is the great new literary star of this year. If you see the great reviews of his book that have been coming out, I won't embarrass him by quoting from them. I'm requesting him to read from his work. A critic recently observed that Vivek Shanbagh's vision of a story begins where it normally ends for most writers. And Suketu Mehta added that Shanbagh's pursuit lies behind merely lulling you into a plot and its characters. He's ferreting for meaning beyond the framework of the story. So now, over to you. I don't think we have time for questions now because we overshot a little bit, but stage is yours, all eager to hear you.
Thank you, Namita. Thank you for your kind words. As Namita said, I write in Kannada, and Kannada is a language which has a unbroken literary history of 1,000 years. And I'm saying this not to say, that this language has 1,000 and the other one has 1,200, but what it does to a writer. When you have 1,000 years of unbroken literary history, it means that you have a language which is so much richer, and you have so many things that you can use, the words, that the memories, and so many things that are at your disposal. It also makes one very, it brings in a kind of humility that I think writers need. The other thing I feel about Kannada and the environment in Kannada is that there are many great writers and who have always had access to multiple cultures. For example, one of our great poets, Bendre, his mother tongue was Marathi. And another great prose writer called Masti, who spoke Tamil at home. My mother tongue is Konkani. And Girish Karnad, as you know, he also, his mother tongue is not Kannada. He spoke Konkani at home. So there is always this tradition of having access to other cultures and also respecting it. So that's one aspect which I think is, quite, can be seen as a kind of quality in Kannada, open to other cultures, open to other languages, absorbing it and making it their own. The second thing I feel is, especially for writers and the young writers, is that we've always been made to feel that it is incidental that we are writing in Kannada. And as you know, literature is not like a tennis game where you have a certain number of opponents and you play against them. Literature is like, Kumar Vyasa, who wrote 500 years ago in Kannada, and Tolstoy and Shakespeare, everyone is contemporary to me. Because literature is one such thing which will make this time collapse and bring everyone together. And that is the kind of mindset that I feel we have in Kannada. And I'm grateful for the writers like Anitmurti, Karnad, Kambar, and many others who have made us feel so, who have pushed us, who have challenged us. When I say us, me and other contemporary writers. And that's something I'm grateful to the culture of Kannada. So before I talk more about it, more about Kannada and other writers and what's happening in Kannada, let me just read out a passage from one of my novels. It is recently been translated into English and published by HarperCollins. It's called Ghachar Ghochar. You must be wondering what this Ghachar Ghochar is. It's a nonsense word. And I'm suggesting that the experience that is captured in this novel is something that cannot be captured with what you already know. We need something, at least I felt that there is something required which is different, which is unknown to capture this experience, and that's why this title. And of course, the title has a meaning, but you need to read the book to understand what it is. I'll read a small passage which is about a household which is infested with ants, and the family is fighting those ants. It was a losing battle though. For all that we did to keep them at bay, they would seize on the smallest lapse and invade. Just when we thought we had the upper hand, they would turn up in the most unlikely places. I once opened my compass box to find it swarming with ants. Amma resorted to chemical warfare, all sorts of powders and poisons. She made a dough from flour and gamexin powder and sealed cavities behind which the ants were suspected of having their hideouts. Whether this killed any ants or not, it at least prevented Amma from feeling entirely powerless. The rest of us too were hardened by strife. It became a reflex to reach out and squash a stray passing ant. On someone's advice, Amma started treating the house with neem smoke. An old tin box was reserved for the purpose. About once a week, burning coals would be tipped into it over a base of sand and handfuls of neem leaves thrown in. It produced thick smoke. Amma covered her nose and mouth with the end of her sari and took the fuming box around the house, letting it linger in corners and behind the cupboard. Once I woke up in the middle of the night to go to the toilet and found Amma in the kitchen. She was on her haunches, facing the wall, tracing the path of a line of ants using a flashlight. Now, unlike rats and cats, ants don't make things fall in the night and wake people up. I can only imagine the clamor they must have created in her mind. At one stage, she even went around meeting officials and got the corporation to fog the neighborhood. It's impossible to say whether it made a difference. We still had ants. We had no compunction towards our enemies and took to increasingly desperate and violent means of dealing with them. We would flatten them with our hands or feet or books wherever we saw them. If we noticed that they had laid seize on a snack, we might trap them in a circle drawn with water and take away whatever they were eating, then watch them scurry about in confusion before wiping them off with a wet cloth. I took pleasure in seeing them shrivel into black points when burning coal were rolled over a group of them. When they attacked an unwashed vessel or a cup, they would soon be mercilessly drowned. I suppose initially we did these things only when we were alone, but in time we began to be openly cruel to ants. We saw them as demons come to swallow our house and became a family that took satisfaction in the destruction of ants. We might have changed houses since, but habits are harder to change. Let me read a small para, just to give you a flavor of how Kannada sounds. Half a minute. ಒಂದು ಹೆಜ್ಜೆ ಮುಂದಿಟ್ಟು ಕಪಾಟಿನೊಳಗಿನ ಬಟ್ಟೆಗಳೊಳಗೆ ಮುಖ ತೂರಿಸುವಷ್ಟು ಹತ್ತಿರ ಹೋದೆ. ಆ ವಾಸನೆ ಇನ್ನಷ್ಟು ಬೇಕೆನಿಸಿತು. ಒಂದು ಸೀರೆಯನ್ನೆಳೆದು ಮೂಸಿದೆ. ಆದರೆ ವಾಸನೆ ಗಾಢವಾಗುವ ಬದಲು ತೆಳುವಾದಂತೆನಿಸಿತು. ಯಾವ ಬಟ್ಟೆಯನ್ನೆಳೆದು ಮೂಸಿದರೂ ಅಷ್ಟೇ, ಇಡೀ ಕಪಾಟಿಗಿರುವ ಪರಿಮಳವು ಒಂದೊಂದೇ ಬಟ್ಟೆಯನ್ನೆತ್ತಿಕೊಂಡಾಗ ಇರಲಿಲ್ಲ. So I was talking about, Namita has said that I should just talk about whatever that yeah. So let me say a few more things about Kannada and what's happening in Kannada and you know how interesting that literary atmosphere is. There are quite a few new writers, and interestingly they are from different walks of life. Many of them are IT engineers because Bangalore happens to be the IT hub. And another interesting thing is the Dalit writers. Now we have second generation Dalit writers. You know, for example, someone called Jannavi, who is a second generation Dalit writer, I can say, and who is writing, and the concerns are of, they're completely different than the first generation Dalits, which is very interesting. Because we are used to a kind of Dalit writing, and the kind of expectation was, you know, forced upon them. But now you see a different writing coming up in Kannada. Also, there is lot of appetite for serious fiction. And I used to run a journal called Deshakala for 7 years, and it's a literary journal, quarterly, and very serious journal. And I was surprised because I used to send it, you know, it was sold in shops and then courier and this and that. And there were subscribers, about 150 subscribers from villages where the courier can't reach. So I had to send them by post. Because nowadays in a courier, there is no place where the courier doesn't go. But imagine 150 people, you know, reading this kind of a serious journal. I think it is, I was so thrilled to, know this. That kind of atmosphere exists in Karnataka. And I think as a writer, I'm very grateful to people, my peers, elders, and everyone who has, made me into what I am today. So one or two things I want to talk about the translation, because what is happening is that, of course, it's a known fact that we don't have great translators. But even if we don't have very good translators, I feel that whatever we can get, we must attempt to get them. In my own experience, when I first read Vaikam Muhammad Bashir, a great Malayalam writer, it was a bad translation, misprint, and badly printed book. In spite of all this, the power of that writer came across, and I have almost followed that writer for more than 30 years now. And of course, now there are good translations available. But the point I'm making is the power of literature, the power of writing, that comes across even in bad translation. This book is translated my book is translated by someone called Srinath Perur. And it has been done in a slightly different way because we work together, and Srinath himself is a creative writer. So I think it makes a lot of difference. Talking about translation, I remember a story. We have, in one of the Ramayanas, Ravana is intensely in love with Sita, and a lot of lust in him, and he somehow wants to, conquer her and have her. So he decides to take the form of Rama and go to her. And when it happens, it is not that there is a change externally. There is also change internally. And all his lust goes away. And he's not anymore interested in Sita. So I think it's a very interesting metaphor for translation. Because when you translate, it is important that the quality, that is unsaid, which is there in a work, that has to come into another language. It is like this work, taking birth in another language. And especially that unsaid, which is a writer builds with, so many things, with words, with memories, and with so many things. So that has to be carried into another language. And I think it is a struggle. It is not easy, but I think it is very much necessary. Having said that, I think it is also necessary that, we have a lot of translation between Indian languages. Like I talked about, our writers who have, Marathi as their mother tongue and Tamil and this and that. So at least between South Indian languages, in fact, even with Bengali, we have had direct translations in the past. And unfortunately, slowly that is going away. And of course, there are many people within South Indian languages, but very few people doing it from Bengali, for example. As far as I know, there's only one person. There were two and one passed away. So it is not a very good thing. And it is not, it doesn't help writers much. And I think we need to do something about it. I try to do whatever I can through my journal, but some other effort I think is required, and I think it's very important. Maybe, can we, some questions? Yeah? Yeah. Okay, okay. Okay. Sure. Yeah. Okay. So, talking about my writing, I think I will, as I said, I'm grateful to many of my peers and elders. Let me just narrate one incident, one story that I have experienced with one of our senior writers. And that is someone called Yashwant Chittal, to whom I have dedicated this book to. And I come from a small village in coastal Karnataka. I grew up there. My first 17 years were spent in that village. And at that time, when I was 16, 17-year-old, I wanted to become a writer. I used to read a lot. And at that time, I felt that to be a writer, you have to really, travel and go abroad and do all sorts of things and to get that experience. But Yashwant Chittal, when I started reading him, he's one of our finest writers, one of the finest writers of Kannada. When I started reading him, his stories were all very local, something about happening in that village and all that. So, and suddenly it opened up another world to me. And I felt that it is so important that first you have to look around and live the life that you have. And there is so much there. And I just fell in love with him. And he's also, it so happens that he's also from the same place where I come from. And I wrote to him, and he said, he's visiting my town in some 2 months' time, and we'll be happy to meet. So then he took me to his village, and it is called Hanehalli. And in all his stories, that village appears. And we went, I was 17-year-old and going with the senior writer, and we went to his village. And there is, that village appears in almost all his stories. It is like Faulkner's, town, or, Kambar's Shivpura and things like that. So I go there, and then he took me around, and he has a beautiful story called Abolin, in which a small girl, a 13, 14-year-old girl, is made to believe that by kissing, that one gets pregnant, and a crook in the village kisses her and tells her that you are pregnant, and she doesn't, have a mother. And then she is married to him, and so on and so forth. A very tragic story. And her husband and her father goes to the church and to talk to the father there. And then he comes back, with such heavy heart. He comes down that steps, and I can't, forget that scene. And we go to the church, and I see that the church is so little, and there are only 3 steps there. But what it was in my imagination was completely different. And it suddenly told me what it is, what is reality and what it means to show it in literature. And I think it is an unforgettable lesson. And what a metaphor means. In that one visit, I think he taught me enormous number of things. And something that, I would not have learned otherwise, learning any number of theories, any number of literary theories and this and that. So I think it was a great experience. I thought I must share it with you. Before we close, I want to read one small passage. This is again from this book, because this is what I have right now. This book also deals with, part of this book also deals with arranged marriages, yeah? And it so happens that in this particular part that I'm going to read, that this is a scene where they are getting married, and the narrator has not met her. It so happens that because of certain circumstances, they are meeting for the first time when they are getting married, as it happens in many arranged marriages, but that is how it is. And because of that, there are so many rituals and symbolic things that happen, where he has to touch her because of a certain ritual, and that symbolic touch becomes a real touch because he's touching her for the first time, and suddenly the whole thing changes. So this is what I'm going to read, a very short one, but okay. On our wedding day, Anita managed to look more beautiful than I had been able to imagine her. She carried herself with poise. Her thick braid hung down to her waist. She was wearing lipstick. The first chance I got, I stole a sideward glance at the blouse under her dark blue sari. We had few chances to speak during the ceremony, and these went in saying things like, "So much smoke, who is that teasing you?" A classmate. There was a strange charm even in exchanging inanities. The ceremony required me to hold her hand at times or touch her arm with my index finger, and these brief moments of contact would be the cause of an immense thrill. When it was time to tie the tali round her neck, I leaned in close, and a whiff of fragrance went straight to my head. The scent of flowers and her close presence were almost too much. For a brief instant, I felt unsteady on my feet. She stood there with her head bowed. Flecks of turmeric dotted the down on her cheek. My fingers brushing against the back of her neck, I tied the knot. At lunch, when we had to feed each other sweets, the tips of my fingers touched her lower lip for a moment. The jolt this produced took a while to subside. I was still helpless when she brought a piece of jalebi to my mouth. I seized her hand and pretended to bite off her fingers. A few girls nearby went, "Ah, so sweet," and I felt embarrassed at my own antics. The wedding photographer, hankering for such moments, made me feed her again. While we were still at lunch, a large group from Anita's side came to us and introduced themselves one by one. Then in the afternoon, an army of elders from both sides took turns sitting on a chair so we could fall at their feet and seek blessings. In the evening, we went home exhausted. Fortunately, the more annoying relatives didn't follow us home. We could have dinner in peace and retire to our room upstairs. I had on a white cotton kurta bought specially for the night. My mind swirled with possibilities that lay ahead as we made our way to the room. I found it hard to even look at her. I tried to act casual as I closed the door behind us, but slid the bolt in slowly so the others at home wouldn't notice. When I turned around, she was standing by the bed. The light switch was next to the door, and I turned it off. The room was now faintly lit by the haze from the street lamp outside. I walked to her. I took a step closer. I could smell her scent now. I didn't know what to do next, and I paused for a moment. Then I raised my right hand and placed it on her shoulder. One thing alone gave me the courage to touch her. We were now married. My hand lowered itself along her arm and stopped at her elbow. My left hand went to her waist and drew her closer. She moved towards me as well, and we embraced. Her touch, her smell, the fragrance from the flowers she was wearing, the press on her chest on mine, her lips against my neck. That single moment's intensity hasn't been matched in my life before or since. A woman I didn't know had chosen to accept me in body and mind. Perhaps it is this instant that forms the basis of traditional marriage. A complete stranger is suddenly mine, and then I am hers too. I must offer her my all. I want her to wield her power over me as an acknowledgement of my love. The rush of these feelings all together is too much to describe. Language communicates in terms of what is already known. It chokes up when asked to deal with the entirely unprecedented. Thank you.
We have some time for questions to either of them, both of them. I think we need the mic here. This lady first. Do give us your name.
My name is Kamla Ganesh and I am from Mumbai. My question is to Mr. Shanbagh. Mother tongue Konkani and writing in Kannada,
Yeah.
and you gave some other examples. We always make a big thing in Indian writing that, writing in the mother tongue and then writing in an alien tongue, etc., English, so on. So I want you to capture this experience of mother tongue Konkani and writing in Kannada. What did that mean?
See, it means a lot because many of my situations in my novels, they happen in Konkani. Yeah, see, I live in different worlds. I live in a, Konkani is my mother tongue, and the Konkani is spoken in Goa, Karnataka, and Kerala. Yeah, and in Goa, and they use 3 different scripts. In Goa, they use Devanagari and sometimes Roman. In Karnataka, it is the Kannada script, and in Kerala, it is Malayalam script. But we don't have Konkani schools in Karnataka. It is more of a dialect in Karnataka. But of course, the books are there, the people write and all this. There are no schools. It is not a medium of instruction in any part of Karnataka, while it is a medium of instruction in Goa. Now, I grew up speaking Konkani at home. And as you know, every language has its own sensibility, and it is a way of looking at the world. And there is a complete different worldview that comes with a language. And now I started writing in Kannada because I studied in Kannada medium till my 10th standard. And invariably what happens is that the richness of this Konkani filters into Kannada when I write. It happens in different ways. For example, a situation in my novel happens perfectly in Konkani. There is a dialogue that happens in Konkani, and I have to bring that into Kannada, and there is already a translation happening. And as a result, that kind of, the sentences, the structure of the sentences, some kinds of words, and the way you look at things, those things are brought into Kannada. And people have acknowledged this about my writing, and many others whose mother tongue is not Kannada. So we bring in certainly some new things into the language. So I think that is the contribution that we make.
Thank you. I think there is a question from the venue manager who never gets a chance, but you had a Bangla speaker here after all.
It was really a delight, ma'am, to hear you. That short piece in Bengali also told so many things. And I just was coming to my mind because you said you were into the civil services. So you still serving and writing. So both are very challenging fields, very demanding and very different than the other. There's no connection as such. And you should be dealing with so many things in your career also. So has it ever come to your mind of whatever incidents or things happen, are you going to write something about that also for us? And if we can have an insight into your career as to what all challenges you faced day in and day out, that would really be lovely.
I think only that part of my career is relevant where I went near people and tried to understand them. Maybe I will write something which I'm planning, autobiography of an unknown civil servant someday.
There was a question there and then here.
My question to Mr. Vivek, as he mentioned introducing someone, Dalit writer. My question is, why there is need to labeling as Dalit writer? Is this make any difference?
It does not make any difference, and I don't think one should label any writer. Nobody likes it. The reason why I said is that is how the current situation is, and in fact, many Dalit writers wants to call themselves as Dalit writers. Yeah, but when they are assessed, when they are reviewed, when they are compared, when we read them, like them, we don't read them because they are Dalit writers. Like for example, one of our finest writers, Devnur Mahadeva, he happens to be a Dalit. That's why I said he's a finest writer. He's not finest Dalit writer. He's one of our finest writers. So it so happens that it is Dalit. It's a No, that's why I said that most of the Dalit writers, almost all of them, wants to call themselves Dalit writers. They want to be called Dalit writers.
Saying is, and I second that, that they use it as a way, they don't want to be part of the mainstream because it's a form of solidarity. It makes a difference to them. If they wish to be called a Dalit writer, who are we to say don't call yourself a Dalit writer? You agree? You know, I'll give you an example there. In this very stage, one of the great Dalit writers, Kancha Ilaya, came many years ago. And he said, as Dalit writers, we don't like to engage with the mainstream, except in the Jaipur Literature Festival. Because here, people recognize, you see, it's a form of, they recognize the transformational process and this thing. So your point is taken, his point is taken, but that may be so, but that is not the subject of today's this thing. You'll have to have a special session on Dalit writing and argue with a Dalit writer why he wants to call himself. But now I think you're getting into a circle. Because, yeah.
I agree.
Please,
My
get up
question-
and introduce yourself, please.
My question to Anita. Sarath translations into Telugu, Sarath translations into Telugu won the people of Telugu people hearts. But how far they affect Bengali people? Sarath translations into Telugu.
Telugu won the hearts of
They
Telugu
won the
people.
hearts of
But how
Telugu
far
people.
Sharat Chandra is
they
still
affect,
popular in Bengal is his question.
Unfortunately, Sharat Chandra is no more very popular in Bengal. It's kind of Bengali readers, you know, they transit very fast. So Sharat Chandra does not appeal apparently now because, you know, he was not cerebral enough. His writing basically dwelled upon the emotions and spontaneous reactions to reality. So that is probably one reason. But as a writer, I am still very fond of him. And if somebody can evoke emotion 100 years back, he must be really a eternal writer. But for Bengali general readers, he is no more important writer.
Question from our volunteer.
Ma'am, my question is also to you, and since this session is about your writer self at home and in the world, and you mentioned that because of your professional decisions, you have been disconnected linguistically, and you've been trying to overcome that through reading. But how do you overcome the exile you feel from the everyday comfort of hearing your language and being in the evolution of the language?
Yeah, I have missed a lot of that. I do speak to my children and in my family, but every day, the dynamism that is being associated with a evolving language, I have missed out on that. So this is something which cannot be compensated. It has happened because of some choices I made early in my life, like not marrying a person who speaks Bengali, but I have no regrets.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? Yeah. There. Can somebody take the mic there, please?
Hello, ma'am. Hello, sir. My name is Saurabh Dua. I am from Punjab. So my question is for Anita, ma'am. What I want to ask is that earlier in your presentation, you said that you aren't a very confident writer. So did you ever get criticized for your work? And if you did, how did you deal with it?
No, I didn't say because of that. My lack of confidence comes from the struggle that happens within myself. You know, I also feel that a confident individual is a great threat to the society. I would like to be ambivalent, vulnerable, and always kind of doubting myself. And as an artist, I think this is the best way of, you know, letting my work speak. Not because of criticism, of which I have very little I don't care much about them. You know, I'm strong outside, but I'm vulnerable inside.
Basically, she's saying that she works very hard at remaining unconfident. Is there any more questions? Otherwise, I also had a question somewhere. Yeah? It was about translations from different languages. And it had been, you know, he said Kannada is very accepting of other languages. They translate a lot from other languages in India. And it was once told to me, I don't know if it is true, that Bangla is the only language which doesn't really encourage too much translation. Bangla literature is one of the most translated literatures in India, and all the other languages, as he mentioned, Telugu, they all have a lot of Bangla literature in them. But Bangla itself, I was told, and I don't know if it's true or not, is a bit disdainful or not caring about the other Indian literatures. Is this true?
Yes, sadly it is true, and being a Bengali, I have some right to say that Bengalis are not they do not like to relate to other Indian literature. They would like to read something Bolivian in Bengali or from, let us say, Hungary, but not from other Indian languages. They are kind of insensitive and a bit close, something which I also find very uncomfortable about. So this is a reality, and we don't work hard. Like today, I can speak Marathi, Odia, Hindi, and English, but many of my kind of contemporary writers would ever know any other Indian language, you forget about Hindi. I think we need to open up more, and we are not Indian enough in that sense, which is a shortcoming, I would say.
I just want to comment something. Karnataka is the only state that has an academy for translations. As far as I know, no other state has an academy for translations, and they get good funding.
Actually, Kannada is much more cosmopolitan within the Indian languages than, say, I'm not being critical, otherwise this will become some controversy tomorrow. I was just curious if it's true. And I was wondering what are the audience, because we have another 2 minutes where, it helps me to know, in the audience, which are the languages, how many of you are familiar, confident reading in English? Hindi? Any other Indian language? Marathi? Bengali? How many in Bengali? Quite a few. Kannada? One. Well, you better be the wife, spouse of the thing. You know, because it's fascinating how many different languages do show up in our festival from the different streams. What language is that? You have a question? Very short, quick question. You have the mic? We'll give you the mic in a minute.
In Agra also there is a language
Sorry?
department. In Agra also there is a translation department. Dr. Rambilas Sharma had started it, and they do translations and all in the language department.
Was that Agra or Ara?
Yeah, Agra.
Agra.
So it's an academy, is it?
Pardon?
Is it an academy for literary
There is an
translations?
institute, language department total.
There are language departments. There is a big institute in Mysore.
Translation, very
Yeah, there
good
is a language.
work going on in
Yeah,
that
yeah.
department.
But
He's talking about the academy, okay.
specializes in literary translations. So this has been a most enlightening, gently meandering, startling. I still carry the image of those ants in your compass box. And all of us are absolutely delighted. A very, very big, long clap for both our writers, please.
It was a pleasure having you all with us